Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today we're talking about The Killing Kind by Bryan Smith. This is a book that I don't remember how. Oh, I got it as like an eBay haul. And I have read, this is kind of what kicked off me reading a lot of other Bryan Smith books. He is one of probably my favorite authors. I like especially a lot of his like more paranormal-esque books, but he writes a lot of really good slasher and crime books, which this one very much is. To the spoiled rich kids on spring break, the rented house seemed like the perfect setting for partying, drinking, and general fooling around. The neighbors wouldn't be able to hear their music, but the unhinged killers about to crash the party think the house is perfect too. The neighbors won't be able to hear the screams, and there will be much more blood flowing than booze. One by one, as the night of terror wears on, the college friends will learn the gruesome results of meeting a very different kind of people. The Killing Kind. This, I think, is also the first book that introduces Roxy, who becomes a character in several other Bryan Smith works. And Roxy is kind of like a young, attractive serial killer. She's very much a slasher. In this book literally starts off with her kidnapping Rob, who is like a gas station attendant with a really cool car, and kind of making him be a part of her crimes, which I kind of thought was pretty neat and a different take on some of the other books I've read in the genre. If you're a Richard Lehman fan, I definitely think you'll enjoy this book. It is very much extreme horror, and it like in the first 2 or 3 chapters of this book, you are either in it or you are out. Just the level of gore and violence that happened like page to page, which I think is good. I think extreme horror should be a litmus test on, I think, as someone that doesn't like all extreme horror, I like some extreme horror. Like I like Bryan Smith, but there are works that I won't read because I'm like, all right, that's too much for me. But I know within the first couple chapters, and I've always appreciated that. That being said, this book is a lot of fun. I think I also read Depraved, which says the author of Depraved. This book isn't as like... Depraved had a whole lot going on. This book doesn't have all that kind of stuff. It's not so much like the paranormal elements that Depraved had. This is mostly just following 2 separate serial killers, Roxy and then another group, as they converge on Myrtle Beach to take down essentially the same group of teenagers who have pissed them off, right? Really just douchey college kids that have made enemies of 2 sets of serial killers while they are spending a week drinking and partying at the beach, which is not going to probably end well for them. I'm not going to spoil too much about what happens to them because you're just going to have to read that part for yourself. I will say that I really enjoy the fact that when it comes to Bryan Smith books especially, everyone is pretty morally gray, even the victims of a lot of his killers and stuff. So I'm trying to find the way to phrase this. Usually the way his books read, or it's almost like bad things happening to bad people, so you can feel vindicated rooting for the killers in a lot of occasions. And I think it also makes the books more palatable, right? No one's being written as they're like really good people that happen to like stumble in the way of these murderers. Usually, like in this case, the whole reason Roxy is on their tail is because they went out of their way to kind of like harass her while she was at a gas station, and they could have just gone on about their business, not done that, and instead now they are on this serial killer's radar. So and that usually is the way that a lot of Bryan Smith's books play out, and that's something I've always enjoyed, because especially in something like extreme horror where it is very graphic and very visceral, it would feel different, I think, if it was like, this is always happening to good people, or they're always, if you were like rooting for the characters, it would feel gross, I think, a lot of times. Where in this, like, usually the people that are victims are not only have hurt the main killer or main creature or bad guy in some way, shape, or form, they usually have also, or are also doing other things on the page that just make them seem like terrible people. For instance, within this group, there's a lot of infighting, there's a lot of backstabbing, different people are like cheating on each other. Like, you know what I mean? It's like a really messy situation, and none of them are painted in a particularly good light. It very much seems like they're all kind of trying to maliciously hurt one another at times without having to face any sort of consequences. So when they do face very physical, very life and death consequences, as someone that loves revenge books, at times it almost feels a little cathartic. As someone whose favorite book is The Count of Monte Cristo, I do love reading books where bad people face bad consequences, right? I like that. I'm sure there's some word for that. And that being said, that's not everyone in this book. These are also just very depraved serial killers. Roxy, while unhinged, will go out of her way to kill people randomly. I'm trying to think of a good way to explain her. Think like a very murderous Harley Quinn. While the other killers are basically the essential, like Clyde, and I think the other guy's name is Zeb, are exactly what you think of when you think of like murder hobos in Dungeons and Dragons, right? Like they're just going from town to town and taking victims as they can or as the opportunity arises. I don't want to spoil too much. Obviously, there is a lot of really sick and twisted things that happen within this book. It is extreme horror. So if that's not your thing, this book probably won't be for you. That being said, I did enjoy it. It is one of the things that really got me into Bryan Smith books. And I would say if you're a fan of, William Johnson's horror books, he wrote a lot of pretty disturbing horror books. And then obviously a whole mess of Westerns. Or even Richard Lehman's horror books. Like if you like them and are familiar with that type of horror, I don't think anything in this book will surprise you. At least not like when it comes to like the gore and crimes and stuff that are being committed. Like that's not going to be something that you're like, oh, that's too much for me. But that being said, I definitely think that fair warning, if extreme horror isn't for you, you should probably pass this one on because this is extreme horror. I definitely enjoyed this book better than Depraved. Depraved, not gonna lie, was a little much for me. Just as, that's a whole other discussion, obviously. I won't do that on this channel. Sorry about that. Depraved was a lot. So if you've read Depraved by Bryan Smith and you're like, I don't know if I want to read another Bryan Smith book, I would say check out The Killing Kind, or I have so many of his books I need to review. He's written a lot of like really good, and I can't think of the name of it right now. Or check out Unseen on, I think the second one just came out, or even I can't think of his Halloween horror book. But anyway, he's written a lot of stuff that isn't Depraved. So if that was like where you're like, I don't know, definitely give this book a chance, or give some of his other works a chance. Yeah, I don't really have much else to say about this. I don't want to really spoil too much of what happens, but there are a lot of definite twists in this. I do think another thing that is very interesting about Bryan Smith's books is he does take a lot of schmuck-like characters like Rob and put them in kind of situations where they'll either end up being heroic, or we kind of get to see their descent into darkness. And obviously in this, we get to see like Rob's descent into darkness as he continues to travel with Roxy, even after she begins to kill people. And that is something that I think is very much a Bryan Smith trope, and something that I think is really interesting. That kind of played out into that movie he had come out not too long ago. And there was also a book, but I haven't read the book. I think it was like multiple books, like 68 Kill, which I have not read all of them, but I did see the movie, and it has the guy from Criminal Minds in it. It was really good. I highly recommend checking that out. But that is definitely a trope of, and it's not always kind of like a schmuck guy that meets a beautiful woman that gets him in danger, but there's usually like a schmuckish guy character that's kind of usually working some sort of dead-end job. A lot of his books do take place in Tennessee, which I do believe is where he's from, which I always think is fun. I think it's, I do think it's interesting that horror authors really like to write about places where they're from, where obviously like fantasy writers and stuff don't do that. And I do enjoy the fact that you do get a lot of regional flares or regional tastes when it comes to horror. So I do appreciate that. Yeah, there's a lot of just like, kind of like the beginnings of tropes that you can see in this that I really enjoy. As someone that has read a lot of his books, obviously if you haven't read as many of his books, you may be like, I don't know what you're talking about. But schmuckish guy is almost kind of like Dean Koontz, how he usually has like blonde women and the dog, golden retriever usually. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. I just went on a tangent. Read this book. Give it a chance if you like extreme horror. If you don't like extreme horror, you probably won't like this book. I thought it was fun. I think there's also sequels to this now. I do believe Roxy is a character that appears in multiple works. And I think there might actually just be a direct sequel to Killing Kind as well that I have not read. I really need to double check that. And I do also believe that all of his works, for the most part, are in Kindle Unlimited. So if you are a KU reader, it is pretty easy now to read his books. Which, fun fact, I do believe a lot of Richard Lehman books are also in KU now. Which is really neat as someone that, and this is a tangent, I do apologize, but as someone that sometimes debates with themselves whether or not Kindle Unlimited is worth it, the fact that they are now putting a lot of horror into it, like Robert McCammon's books are all in it now and stuff like that, it definitely makes it a lot more worthwhile to me. But like I said, that is neither here nor there. If you read this book, you enjoyed this book, you've read other Bryan Smith books, you liked him, you didn't like him, let me know in the comments below. Let me know of other books too, or other writers that write books similar to this, because like I said, I did enjoy this book. I understand it's not for everybody. I don't do a lot of extreme horror other than Richard Lehman on this channel. But that being said, enough of you liked Richard Lehman that I feel like you would like this book. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.